With the political career of Senator Al Franken nearly over, his state chair, earned thanks only to the votes of felons and illegal immigrants, those two pillars of the Democrat base, will likely go to replacement deputy chair of the DNC, Keith Ellison. Ellison is not only the first Muslim in U.S. congressional history, but a classic example of how the rules of political respectability do not apply to the political left. Mr. Ellison was first elected with the active assistance of members of the Communist Party. He was associated with the Nation of Islam for decades and repeatedly defended its leaders from charges of hate crime. Defending NOI from charges of being anti-white were of course unnecessary because hating whites has always been accepted by the media. Ellison has also explicitly endorsed black nationalism. In an editorial piece written under the name of Keith Hakeem on February 2, 1990, he complained that welfare payments were not generous enough and called for territory to be ceded from the United States for the creation of a black ethnostate. This wouldn't be problematic for white identitarians, as blacks would then have real control over their own culture and communities, while whites would be liberated from white guilt. Furthermore, public policy could then be based on what works instead of ethnic grievances. Mr. Ellison wrote this article in his late 20s, and it is striking that someone who has such a prominent career now received no criticism for his plan to dismember the Union. Anyone who proposed a white ethnostate in college would never find a job, even within the conservative movement. And this possible upcoming seat is an absolute ideological litmus test for the Beltway right. Not only has Mr. Ellison's career flourished, no black in Congress has ever disavowed his plan to break up the country along racial lines. In stark contrast, someone like Steve Bannon, who has quite unreasonably denounced white identitarians, is still described as a white nationalist by the mainstream, or at least as someone friendly to them. But what explains this, aside from the usual anti-white double standard? Civic nationalism is still implicitly white because most American citizens are still white, and more importantly, civic nationalists claim European America's history as a source of pride and identity. Non-whites regard this history as something to be tolerated at best and condemned at worst. Their own history is one of resistance against European America. Their participation in our political system is to further their own interests. Thus, we have foreigners seeking citizenship not for the purpose of becoming American, but to advance foreign cultural interests. They want the material benefits of being American, but reject any suggestion they should identify with America or become American culturally themselves. Anti-whites usually justify their arguments for increased non-white immigration on the grounds that America was founded on racial equality. But do they really believe this? What Peter Brimelow calls the historic American nation is above all a European idea, which is why its history, heroes, and symbols are being deconstructed. It is also for this reason that even colorblindness has become racist, because colorblindness means siding with a legal system, a culture, and a history defined by whites. A call for a white ethnostate will always be criticized much more severely than a call for a black one. This is partly because America is squeamish about any kind of criticism of blacks or their demands, even when black claims are perfect parallels of white claims. But there is an important reason why Europeans who call for an ethnostate are always much more of a threat than non-whites who call for one. We are serious, and they are not. Everyone knows a white ethnostate would thrive, and why whites would want to live in one. A black homeland would simply be another Africa. The central myth of American race relations is the assumption that whites benefit from the presence of black bodies. In reality, blacks impose a terrible cost. White nationalism or separatism is simply a large-scale expression of how most whites already lead their lives. They move as far away as possible from blacks and their attendant financial costs, emotional distress, and physical danger. Whites simply want to be left alone. In theory, black nationalism should represent the aspiration for blacks to live free from their white oppressors. In practice, blacks know this would never work. If they really believed in black nationalism, they would be fleeing to the ethnostates already created for that purpose, such as Liberia and Sierra Leone, or to black homelands forged through revolution such as Haiti. As most blacks do, Mr. Ellison simply abandoned nationalism in favor of a more lucrative and pragmatic approach of milking liberal whites for more handouts. If black fury at white America and the relatively low socioeconomic status of most blacks could be magically cured, white liberals would lose their raison d'etre. Or, as Mr. Ellison strikingly put it when explaining why white liberals would oppose black nationalism, liberals justify their existence by championing so-called lost causes. Thus, white nationalism will always be a systematic danger in a way black or Hispanic nationalism never will. As The Atlantic put it, European nationalism is an existential threat. Even saying it's okay to be white throws the system into complete turmoil. White identity threatens to remake the entire social order because a white ethnostate would work. Indeed, the United States for most of American history operated as something approaching an ethnostate, and it became the most powerful nation on the planet. Whites simply have nothing to gain by trying to live in the same society as Mr. Ellison. The double standard of insisting on integrating into a multicultural cesspit while smiling benignly on fantasies of black separation looks increasingly threadbare. Meanwhile, an army of disaffected European Americans is silently growing.